For anyone who wants to deepen their understanding of Bob Dylan as an artist, his live albums and bootleg series are essential listening. On stage and in the studio, they feature rewriting, rearrangement, alternate takes, fully fleshed out songs that never saw the light of day, and much more for the itinerant scholar to chew on. This is part 2 of a 4-part series in which I use the tier listing framework as a cheap gimmick to bring the best of Bob's shadow catalog to light. Before we get going, I want to encourage you to like this video and subscribe to my channel, and if you're afraid to make that kind of commitment, just think of all the nerdy Bob Dylan content you'll miss if you don't. And if you're feeling extra saucy, I've got a Patreon page where you can support my fledgling musical life with real human currency. Click the link in the video description to see all the wonderful perks you'll get. And now, let the tier listing continue. 7. The Bootleg Series Volume 2. This installment covers a lot of ground. It covers a lot of time. It starts with 7 Curses, which you can fairly well describe as just a folk song. It's a little bit like the Ballad of Hollis Brown, where it doesn't feel like Dylan innovating on folk songwriting, it just feels like him doing it as excellently as it can be done, which it's funny to say that that isn't a transcendent achievement. But, you know, in a sense, it's not a transcendent achievement. It's the equivalent of Picasso's formalist paintings. Like, formalism was a style that predated him. Surrealism and Cubism are styles that he more or less invented, or at least was there for the inception of. As somebody most interested in artists pioneering new styles, that is what's most interesting to me. But so the point being, it starts with him showing mastery of a folk style that already existed. And it goes through him developing numerous additional styles of his own. I'm grateful for the acoustic take of Subterranean Homesick Blues, both because it showcases his new poetic style, and because it is so much better with a band. You can sort of infer his thought process that the energy of that song would just be better bolstered by a rock backing band. I'm also grateful for the demo of Like a Rolling Stone, which is played in a waltz time signature. The reason I'm grateful for those songs is I think listening to Bob Dylan, especially as a singer-songwriter, you can get the sense sometimes that this stuff just poured out of him in these years fully fleshed out. And it most certainly did not. It took a lot of experimentation and evolution for the initial idea of the song to get to its fully crystallized form. There are just instructive glances into Bob Dylan's creative process when he was at the peak of his powers, which is incredibly valuable. The Blood on the Track stuff, you get a sense not just of his individual songwriting process, but of his album compiling process. Take Idiot Wind, for example. In isolation, this take of Idiot Wind is beautiful in a way that the official album's Idiot Wind is not. It's tender, it's meditative, it's sweet, whereas the official release is aggressive and mean and biting. But I still think he made the right decision by including that latter take on the official album, because the album as a whole needed multiple moods. If he had just released these original sessions, it would have had just one mood, or one mood with very little variation. Like Volume 1, it's not really something you'd want to listen to start to finish. It's something you want to sort of pick out songs from and just have them at your disposal. It has both excellent original songs that haven't really seen the light of day. It has clues into his creative process, which, particularly for fellow creatives, is pretty fascinating. And yeah, I mean, it's hard for me to say that for those who take a scholar's approach to Bob Dylan, that this isn't something that they absolutely must listen to. It really is. Because this installment covers Dylan's path into a poetic style all his own, I think I would put it just above Volume 1 in the A tier. 8. The Bootleg Series Volume 3. This one is a little bit perplexing to me. I think on the one hand, once you get past 1975, Dylan's vault gets a little bit more fallow. There's just not as much transcendent stuff from the late 70s and early 80s, but there is some great stuff, and I feel like particularly his 80s material gets a little bit of a strange approach here. Yes, Blind Willie McTell is one of his best compositions, absolutely. Series of Dreams is a very good song. Tell Me, I don't think I would have included. Lord Protect My Child, I'm not sure I would have included. You Changed My Life, Need a Woman. For example, Caribbean Wind is a much better song than You Changed My Life. The Christian Years Bootleg Series installment that came out later had some other great original songs on it. Ain't Gonna Go to Hell for Anybody was a cool one, or Making a Liar Out of Me was a cool one. The early 80s stuff here is largely not that great, and not altogether representative to me about what was interesting about those years. If the mission of this first Bootleg Series collection, volumes 1 to 3, was to take the cream of the crop from, the first 25 years or so of his career, Volume 3 does the worst job of it, I think. Having said that, there are some terrific choices as well. I am so happy that we know the song Catfish. I'm very happy we have Foot of Pride. I'm very happy we have Blind Willie McTell, Series of Dreams. The alternate take of When the Night Comes Falling from the Sky is interesting. I don't think it's better. It does have the E Street Band on it, so from a kind of interesting studio moments in rock history, it's cool that it's here. The question with these 3 installments of the Bootleg series is, are these encyclopedias that you want on your shelf? For the Dylan devotee, the answer is yes, but it's a little bit less of a resounding yes here, especially in the days of streaming where you can pick and choose your favorite things. The first 2 installments, I would almost say, a big Dylan fan should hear all of those songs at least one time, if not several times. This one I would say, there's probably 2/3, maybe 3/4 of an album's worth of good songs here. And then there's a lot of stuff that is pretty easy to dismiss. This is a pick and choose. Here Catfish, here Foot of Pride, here Blind Willie McTell, here Series of Dreams. The rest of it, listen to. Give it a chance. But then if you're not grabbed by it, it's not your fault. I think in general this becomes a high B tier bootleg installment. 9. MTV Unplugged. This is a recording that kind of makes me smile. In part because, the mid-90s was a period in which he rediscovered his enthusiasm, his clarity, his conviction, after, probably 8 years or so of seeming pretty lost on stage. Starting in 1987, he sounded very, very disillusioned, and by all accounts, in what he's written and said about those years, he was. He had lost the spark. He didn't know what he wanted to add to his musical legacy. And if you listen to the live recordings from that interval, from about 87 through 93 or so, what you can really hear is an artist who does not know what he wants to be, who he wants to be on stage. There's a story that one of his kids expressed concern over his drinking in the early 90s, and then he quit. It could be apocryphal, it could not be. But in any case, in 93 and 94, he rediscovers his stage conviction. His vocal cords are pretty damaged at this point, but he has a lot of conviction, and Bob Dylan with conviction will find a way to make unconventional things sound good. It's the happiness you feel when a loved one gets out of rehab. Whether or not they're as quick as they used to be or as sharp as they used to be, they're at least happy sounding, or they've at least gone from totally lost to somewhat found. And it feels good. It feels good. There is a lot of fine musicianship on this album. I do love the arrangement of Tombstone Blues. The standout track from this album is John Brown, which is a pretty obscure original song from the very earliest stages of his creative life. He just crushes the delivery on that song. I sang the song recently, and it's rapid fire lyrics. If you're not all the way there, if you're not certain of what's about to come next, you will miss it. The train will outrun you, and he just crushes it. And then the band arrangement of that song is terrific. Yeah, Knocking on Heaven's Door, it has some lovely plaintive vocal moments from Bob. Is this Bob at the height of his powers? No. Is this a sort of rejuvenated, reinvigorated Bob? Absolutely. If the value of his shadow catalog is the moments of rewriting, rearrangement, remaking that he would do in the studio and on stage, is this the best example of it? Not really. But is this a real smile-inducing moment in the story of his career? Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yeah, so it's a low B, I would say. 10. The Bootleg Series Volume 4, Bob Dylan Live 1966, the Royal Albert Hall Concert. Part of what the Bootleg Series is great at capturing are these signal moments in Bob Dylan's career. This is the infamous show in which somebody shouted Judas at him, and then he calls the person a liar, and then supposedly turns to the band, by which I literally mean the band, and says, play f***ing loud. Was it him that said that? Was it a British stagehand? It does kind of sound British. We don't know. Doesn't really matter. It's a great moment. Great moment in the history of rock and roll. The hook of this album is that it captures that moment. One thing that the Bootleg Series is great at capturing, it's the spectrum between a recording artist's studio life and their stage life. For all of the beautiful things that can happen in the studio work is kind of inert. Playing music is about playing it to and for other people. It's my philosophy, but it's also just, that's the role that music plays in our culture. It's the role that it's always played. The studio is at best a somewhat convincing facsimile of a moment, but it's never the moment itself. For somebody like Bob Dylan, the ethos of his music and his performance is very much, this is the moment. The music is happening in this moment in a way that it will not happen in subsequent moments. performance. You could argue that recording a live concert has that same sort of facsimile quality, but, I think it's one step advanced from the studio in the sense that there is a crowd there, and in the sense that the crowd's reaction comes to bear on how the music is being played in that moment. In the context of Bob Dylan's career, there's maybe no better example of that than this one, than a crowd being by turns appreciative and derisive, a pretty equal portion of people celebrating his turn to electric music and really bemoaning his turn to electric music, and one idiot going so far as to call him Judas. I mean, you gotta get out more. If this is your idea of what betraying the savior of humanity is, what some people consider the savior of, you gotta get out more. This is kind of where Bob Dylan's music is meant to be. It is meant to be on stage. What you see here is Dylan living his music, and living the music from his most powerful poetic phase. This album is in many ways the best depiction of the perfect storm for Dylan in the mid-60s that we have. It's him writing at the peak of his powers, it's him at the peak of his cultural relevance, and it's also probably the peak of the chaos of his personal life. The amount of drugs that he was doing to stay alert, the insane sort of traveling posse that he had, him wanting to be in the eye of that storm and him being in the eye of it. No subsequent phase of his career did he want to be in the eye of the storm in the way that he probably wanted to be in these years. This is him living the energy of that and the results of it, the fruits of it, both rotten and pure, in real time. Some people don't like the acoustic set here. I really do. If we think of this as Dylan being in the eye of that storm, this is him just relishing and sort of luxuriating in the eye of the storm, stretching these arrangements out as far as they can go, turning She Belongs to Me into taffy, just going like that with it and sort of letting it sag. But it's still sweet, The performance of Mr. Tambourine Man is arguably the quintessential performance. The reason I say that is because of the harmonica solos in this take. They're musically pretty simple, but they're artistically not at all simple. He finds a motif on the harmonica and then turns it into a sort of mantra. He repeats it, varies it very slightly, and tries to inject the harmonica solos with the song's essential tenderness, or with the song's essential yearning for freedom from concern. I would say the quintessential take of Mr. Tambourine Man. And then the rock and roll set. I mean, the rock and roll set is kind of where it's at on this album. It's probably one of the best rock sets captured on record, frankly. I can't say enough about how much I like the playing on the rock set. It's loose without falling apart. It's energetic, it's committed, it's purposeful. It's not in a rarefied technical sphere necessarily, but it is in a rarefied artistic sphere and in a rarefied sphere of chemistry. The ingredients that went into producing this kind of chemical reaction, the audience reaction, the relationships between the band members, where Dylan was at creatively and personally. It is such an interesting concoction that could only have resulted from those ingredients. The righteous indignation of Ballad of a Thin Man. The folk irreverence of Baby Let Me Follow You Down or One Too Many Mornings. Additionally, this is probably the quintessential take of Like a Rolling Stone. It's as powerfully as he could possibly deliver it. It's good that it's slowed down. It's good that he takes his time and howls. Special mention for Tell Me Mama, which is a great original rock song that we would not have if it weren't captured here. There are numerous quintessential takes of Dylan's best compositions. Mr. Tambourine Man and Like a Rolling Stone are inarguably, to me, part of his top 10, if not his top 5. And these are the quintessential takes of them, according to me. This is very special. It's quintessential takes of classic material. It's him living his best material in the cultural moment when it was most acutely felt and when it was most, infused with the energy of an interested culture. And it's just some badass rock playing. It's just some badass rock and roll playing. I love everything about it. I would put it comfortably in his S tier. 11. The Bootleg Series Volume 5. Bob Dylan Live 1975, The Rolling Thunder Review. By way of introduction, I will tell a personal anecdote about this album. I got into Bob Dylan when I was 16. That was 2009. It was before, I didn't have any money to buy records, really. Spotify didn't exist yet, so you couldn't just stream his entire catalog for free. Did I ever download an album illegally from the internet? Who's to say? The main way that I was getting new Dylan albums in this phase was going to the library and just checking out for a week or so whatever Dylan albums they happened to have in the CD section of the library. It was a funny selection. Biograph was one of them. Love and Theft was one of them, and I think this was the only other one. It was Biograph, Love and Theft, and this one. At that point, I'd heard Highway 61 Revisited, and I'd heard The Freewheelin' Bob Dylan. So looking at the track list here, I noticed that there were a few songs that I knew. A Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, The Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll. These were titles I recognized and songs that I had, a mental image of, so to speak. And, in general, I had an idea of what I thought Bob Dylan sounded like. Like, I knew he had a sort of folk personality, I knew he had a kind of rock personality, and I knew what those two sounds were like. When I first turned on this album, I sort of checked to make sure that it was actually Bob Dylan, because it was sounds that I had never heard coming out of him before. It was a Dylan band sound that I was not familiar with. It was a Dylan voice that I was not familiar with. I mention all that because it was an important moment in my development as a music listener and maker. The message being, over the course of your career as one artist, you can sound like several different artists. This artist does not sound like the Freewheelin' Bob Dylan artist, does not sound like the Highway 61 Revisited artist. This sounds like a completely new, different artist. This band has a distinct sonic identity that had never existed before and would not exist again. This is a uniquely urgent musical presentation. Of all of Dylan's live albums, this is the one that I've listened to the most times. There's just an emphatic happiness in these songs. Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You. There's just this there is the subtlest irony, I think, in that song. Why do I say that? Because it's just the lyrical choices. Is it really any wonder the changes we put on each other's heads? The diction is just unusual enough for me to feel like the poet is winking at me a little bit. So there's just this subtle little undercurrent of irony in what is otherwise a purely celebratory mood in Tonight I'll Be Staying Here With You. Which again, those are new lyrics compared to what was the lyric on Nashville Skyline. The version of It Ain't Me, Babe on this album is both one of the most dramatic rearrangements and one of the most successful rearrangements in his career. It's the end of the carnival when you're popping champagne bottles and turning on all the lights and setting off fireworks. It just is that celebratory feeling. Hard Rain's Gonna Fall, likewise. Lonesome Death of Hattie Carroll becomes this sort of quasi-reggae arrangement. I don't know if that's necessarily the right word for it. The Desire material I don't think ever sounded better. The Oh Sister is beautiful. I probably prefer this take of One More Cup of Coffee to the album take. The acoustic takes are beautiful. I Shall Be Released this is maybe my favorite version of I Shall Be Released. This is my favorite arrangement of Love Minus Zero. I said in the Bring It All Back Home video that I didn't think that was the best take of that. This, I think, is the best take of that. There is just not a weak moment on this whole album. The point that I keep making is Bob Dylan's material lives when it is live. It does assume a certain energy in the studio, but it lives when it's live. Let's say that the studio is the moment of conception, and then on stage is when the organism itself comes to life and starts living and breathing. This is a hyperbolic statement, but I mean it literally. There is no better example of that than this album. If you only ever listen to one Dylan live album, this is the one that it should be. I could continue waxing about this and may well do elsewhere, but the point is this is the best of the best. This is the best of his live work, I think. And for that reason, I would put it in the topmost point of his S tier. 12. The Bootleg Series Volume 6, Bob Dylan Live 1964, Concert at Philharmonic Hall. Boy, what a weird name for the album. It's like Yoda came up with the title. If the Bootleg Series Volumes 4 and 5 are, singularly essential artistic statements by Dylan, this one is a little bit more interesting historical document. The reason this album exists is to capture a moment between Dylan the folk singer and Dylan the singular surrealist poet. He plays everything from Talkin' John Birch Paranoid Blues, which is as folky of a folk song as you could get, to It's Alright Ma, I'm Only Bleeding, which is as transcendent as his surrealist writing got. I think what you can say is that he sounds a lot more interested in the latter category, the surrealist stuff, than continuing to play the folk stuff. In particular, in The Times They're a-Changin', you can hear him starting to desecrate that old material. I say old, it was like 1 or 2 years old at this point. But artistically, it was old. You know, artistically, it was in a style that stretched back decades, if not centuries. But you can hear him starting to desecrate it. On the Times They Are Changing, he takes this sort of plangent nasal tone in his singing, like as if to say, boy, do you guys still want to hear this stuff? You guys still want to hear this stuff? If you do, I'm gonna have to tell you stylistically that I don't want to sing it. I'm gonna have to put you through something that you don't want to go through in order to hear this material, if you guys really still want to hear this stuff. What I love about this set list is that he plays If You Gotta Go, Go Now, or Else You Gotta Stay All Night after Gates of Eden and before It's Alright Ma. Like, he plays a song that is essentially just a punchline in between two of the most harrowing surrealist poetic statements of his career. There is audacity in that sequencing itself. I don't love listening through this album as much as I love listening through Volume 4 or Volume 5, in part because Dylan is just not yet at his peak. He's on the way to his peak, and he's close to his peak, but he's not quite at it yet. And also because for as excellent as Dylan is as a solo acoustic singer, and he is excellent, playing with the band would open up new artistic valves, through which his artistic sensibility could emanate. And confining himself to just the solo acoustic setting, which I know was a result of, largely at this point a result of pressures at the time, confining himself to that setting kept those valves shut. There are some wonderful individual performances here. The overall vibe is interesting too. I mean, he's performing with a level of arrogance. He has begun to notice that he has the sort of literate public, if you will, in the palm of his hand, and he's performing like he knows it. It a little bit makes you want to slap him sometimes and just be like, don't take this for granted, dude. Don't take it for granted. But then on the other hand, like, artists need audacity. The audacity is the fuel of good art making. You need that. If the spectrum of his Bootleg series is sort of intrinsic artistic greatness to historical fascination, this is way more on that side of the spectrum. That is valuable and interesting, but, compare it to the Bootleg series Volume 4, which is both a great historical document and artistically essential. It has both things in one package. The one other thing I'll say about this is that it's nice to hear him singing with Joan Baez. I kind of understand why he stopped doing that. I mean, he was shooting into an artistic direction that nobody else could possibly follow him down. Many people tried to follow him down that path, and nobody could. Nobody could follow him down that path, including Joan Baez. The art fan in me is grateful that he did that so heedlessly, is grateful that he left people behind who couldn't follow him. But the human in me likes these moments where he maintains contact with somebody who meant a lot to him and somebody who he meant a lot to. They're a good pair. They sing really well together. Is this the best document of his live performance? No, it is not. Is it a great historical document? Yes. Have I listened to this more than a handful of times? No. It's a worthwhile listen, it's edifying, but in and of itself, it's less artistically galvanizing, shall we say, than his best ones. Yeah, I put this just under Before the Flood in his B tier. The albums in this installment are primary, argument fodder, shall we say, in why I consider Dylan the best, or at very least the most interesting popular musician from this era. In particular, the Bootleg series volumes 4 and 5 have some of his very best moments as an artist on them, and nowhere were they represented in the official releases from his catalog before this. The Bootleg Series Volume 5 is every bit the artistic pinnacle that Highway 61 is. It's these radically different arrangements of classic material. It's excellently performed new material. It's so not to be missed. If you like Bob Dylan, if you love Bob Dylan, it is so not to be missed. The material on albums that fall outside of an artist's official studio canon tend to be curiosities, for the obsessive fan. The Who's Outtakes albums are kind of that way. Dylan's, appendix albums, to continue using that phrase, aren't. At their best, they are as artistically essential as his official studio canon. At very least, they sharpen one's understanding of a transcendently powerful creative. Everything covered in this video will give you another clue into how Bob Dylan did what he did, including MTV Unplugged. There's a lot of cool stuff still to go. Please like this video and subscribe to my page to stay tuned for it. As always, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.